We are now going to move into our lecture over cellular respiration. We've talked about photosynthesis and how plants make their energy. We've talked about the basics of energy. And so now we're going to talk about the process by which ATP is formed through cellular respiration. So cellular respiration is the process by which glucose in the cell is then converted into energy in the form of ATP. ATP provides the energy for all cell activities. We've talked about how it helps transport things across the membrane, how it helps with endo and exocytosis. ATP is the molecule that physically charges that active transport in other processes. So an example, if we're talking specifically about plants, photosynthesis creates the food, right? We get the food created here in the chloroplast during the process of photosynthesis. That glucose is then created. Then that glucose is going to be transported to the mitochondria, and that mitochondria is going to end up turning that glucose into the ATP molecules that we can use them in our cell. Because glucose is way too big for us to be using as an active energy molecule. It's not considered usable. We have to convert it into a usable form known as ATP. So here's the equation for cellular respiration. You need glucose and oxygen. And from glucose and oxygen, you end up creating 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and then ATP. If you remember from our photosynthesis lecture, this is the polar opposite of photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis starts with carbon dioxide and water and ends up creating glucose and oxygen when there's sunlight present, correct? Cellular respiration does the opposite effect. It starts with the glucose and the oxygen, and then it does not need light like photosynthesis. It can happen in the dark, and it creates carbon dioxide, water, and then ATP. This occurs in all cells of all organisms, plants, animals, bacteria. Any cell out there has to go through cellular respiration because any cell is going to need ATP. So all cells are going to go through this, and depending on the type of cell, it's going to depend on where this occurs. So where does it take place? Cellular respiration begins in the cytoplasm. So when it begins, the glucose starts to be converted in the cytoplasm. But the majority of it is going to take place in the mitochondria, because that mitochondria is that organelle that ends up making the ATP molecules in mass production. If cellular respiration stays in the cytoplasm, you're only going to end up creating about 2 ATP. But if we end up in the mitochondria, it can create 36, almost 38 ATP, depending on how efficient it's working. And so you're going to want most of them to occur in the mitochondria, but sometimes it does happen in the cytoplasm. So let's review. The formula for cellular respiration: glucose and oxygen creates carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. But once again, it looks like the complete opposite of photosynthesis. We have carbon dioxide and water, which is here, and then sunlight from the sun, and you end up with glucose and oxygen. And so it's a reciprocal process. What photosynthesis is creating, cellular respiration is using. What cellular respiration is using, it creates the reactants in photosynthesis. So it can be a cyclical process that can be used between the two organelles.